The first gunshot missed Pierce Blackwood by less than an inch, splintering the wooden post beside him as he stood on the porch of his ranch house squinting into the morning sun. Summer 1878 had brought nothing but trouble to the Blackwood Ranch in the Colorado Territory, and this visitor with a six-shooter seemed determined to add to his woes. "I ain't asking again, Blackwood," the man's voice carried across the yard, whiskey-soured and mean. "You owe Hollister money, and I'm here to collect." Pierce ducked behind a rain barrel, drawing his own revolver. "I paid Hollister what I owed last month. You tell that snake he can come talk to me himself instead of sending his dogs." The second shot kicked up dirt near Pierce's boots. He returned fire, aiming high, intending only to scare the man off. It worked. The debt collector scrambled onto his horse and galloped away, shouting promises to return with more men. Pierce holstered his weapon and sighed deeply. At 33, he was tired of fighting. 5 years ago, he'd inherited this sprawling cattle ranch from his father with dreams of building something lasting. Instead, a devastating drought had killed half his herd last year, and the recent skirmishes with local bandits had driven off 2 of his ranch hands. Now he was down to just himself and old Hank, who was too arthritic to manage much beyond cooking. The ranch house itself told the story of his struggles once grand by frontier standards. Now it stood dusty and neglected, too large for just 2 men to maintain. Pierce ran a hand through his dark hair, streaked with premature silver at the temples, and made a decision. He needed help around the place, especially with Roundup coming in a few weeks. 2 days later, Pierce rode into Silver Creek, the nearest town 15 miles from his ranch. The settlement had grown considerably in the past years, boasting a general store, 2 saloons, a small hotel, and even a proper church. He tacked a notice to the board outside the general store. "Help wanted. Maid/cook for Blackwood Ranch, room and board provided plus $8/month. Inquire at Blackwood Ranch, or leave word with Sam at the general store. You really think you'll find someone?" Sam asked, leaning against the doorframe of his store. "Hope so. Can't keep living like savages out there." Pierce adjusted his hat. "Hank's cooking is liable to kill us both before the bandits get a chance." Sam chuckled. "Not many respectable women looking for work at isolated ranches these days. Those that are usually head for the mining towns better pay." "I know," Pierce shrugged, "but I've got to try something." He spent the rest of the day restocking supplies and enjoying his brief respite from ranch life. As evening approached, he considered spending the night at the hotel but decided against it. The ranch couldn't be left with just Hank to defend it overnight. The return journey took him through the winding trail that cut across the foothills. The summer evening was pleasant, cooler than the day had been, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and pine. About 5 miles from town, Pierce noticed something unusual on the trail ahead. A young woman sat on a rock by the path, her head bowed. As he approached, he saw 3 young boys huddled beside her. The oldest couldn't have been more than 12, the youngest perhaps 6. Their clothes were dusty and worn, and Pierce immediately noted that the woman wore no shoes, her feet bandaged with strips of cloth. He slowed his horse. "Evening, madam. You folks all right?" The woman's head jerked up, startled. She had a pretty face beneath the trail dust, delicate features, large eyes the color of honey, and chestnut hair pulled back in a simple braid. She couldn't have been more than 25. "We're fine, sir," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "Just resting a moment." Pierce dismounted, approaching slowly so as not to frighten them. "Where are you headed?" The oldest boy stepped forward protectively. "Silver Creek. Our sister's got work there." "That's so." Pierce glanced at the woman, noting her torn dress and the way she winced when she shifted her weight. "Silver Creek's 5 miles back. You've passed it." "What?" The woman's face fell. "But the man at the last town said," she stopped, closing her eyes briefly, "we must have taken the wrong fork." Pierce studied them more carefully. The boys were thin but sturdy-looking, with the same chestnut hair as their sister. They carried small bundles, clearly all their worldly possessions. "I'm Pierce Blackwood. I own a ranch about 10 miles ahead. Where are you coming from?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Clearwater, I'm Clara Wilson. These are my brothers Thomas, Samuel, and James." Pierce whistled softly. "Clearwater, that's near 30 miles from here." Clara nodded, unconsciously adjusting the makeshift bandages on her feet. "We've been walking 3 days." "My shoes." She gestured helplessly. "They weren't made for such a journey. They fell apart yesterday." Something in Pierce's chest tightened at the thought of this young woman walking barefoot for miles, caring for 3 boys along the way. "What kind of work are you looking for in Silver Creek?" he asked. "Anything respectable," Clara answered. "I can cook clean, so I worked as a maid for the doctor's family in Clearwater until—" She trailed off, her expression clouding. Pierce made a quick decision. "Miss Wilson, as it happens, I'm looking for someone to help around my ranch cooking and keeping house. The pay's $8 a month plus room and board." He glanced at the boys. "For all of you." Clara's eyes widened. "All of us. You take the boys too. Ranch is plenty big. Could use some young hands for the small chores." Pierce shrugged as if it were no great matter, though taking on 4 people was no small commitment. "If you're interested, you can ride back with me now, see if it suits you." Clara exchanged glances with the oldest boy, Thomas. The hope and wariness battling on her face were plain to see. "Why would you offer such kindness to strangers?" she asked finally. Pierce adjusted his hat. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be at the end of your rope. Besides, I really do need the help." He gestured to his horse. "You and the youngest can ride. The older boys and I will walk alongside." After a brief conference with her brothers, Clara accepted his offer. Pierce helped her and young James onto his horse, then began leading them toward Blackwood Ranch. As they walked, he learned more of their story. Their parents had died of influenza 2 years prior, leaving Clara to care for her brothers. She'd managed to secure positions for them all in the doctor's household in Clearwater, but when the doctor's son had made improper advances toward Clara and she'd refused him, they'd all been dismissed without references. "We heard there was work in the mining towns," she explained. "But I couldn't. Those places aren't fit for children." Then someone mentioned Silver Creek was growing, might need respectable help. Pierce nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying. A young woman alone with children to support had few options in the territories, and many of them led down dark paths. They reached the ranch as twilight settled over the land. Clara gazed at the sprawling main house and outbuildings with undisguised awe. "It's so big," she whispered. "Been in my family 20 years, Pierce said. "My father built it with big dreams." He didn't mention how those dreams were slipping through his fingers. Old Hank emerged from the house at the sound of their arrival, his leathery face creasing in surprise at the sight of the visitors. "Found us some help," Pierce explained, helping Clara down from the horse. The moment her bandaged feet touched the ground, she winced in pain. "Let's get you inside," Pierce said gently. "Hank, we need some hot water and whatever medical supplies we have." Within the hour, Clara and her brothers were seated at the kitchen table, eating a simple meal Hank had prepared. Pierce knelt before Clara's chair, carefully unwrapping the makeshift bandages from her feet. "This is going to sting," he warned before applying the whiskey-soaked cloth to her raw, blistered soles. Clara bit her lip but made no sound. Pierce worked efficiently, cleaning and bandaging her feet properly, conscious of the 3 pairs of young eyes watching his every move. "You'll need to stay off these for a few days," he said, finishing his work. "They need time to heal." "But the work," Clara protested, "can wait," Pierce cut in. "Hank and I have managed this long. A few more days won't kill us." That night, Pierce showed them to their rooms in the east wing of the house, a large bedroom for Clara and a connecting room with 2 beds for the boys. The rooms had stood empty for years, gathering dust, but they were clean enough for now. "We'll get everything properly sorted tomorrow," Pierce promised. "For tonight, just rest." Later, as he sat on the porch smoking his evening pipe, Hank joined him. "Taking in strays now, are we?" the old man asked, but there was no judgment in his tone. Pierce exhaled a stream of smoke. They needed help. And we need help, Hank agreed. But 4 mouths to feed when we're already stretched thin, we'll manage, Pierce said firmly. Those boys are strong. Once they learn the ropes, they'll be useful around here. Hank studied him for a long moment. It's the sister that caught your eye, though, isn't it? Pierce didn't answer, just tapped his pipe against the porch rail and stared out at the darkened landscape. The next week brought significant changes to Blackwood Ranch. Despite Pierce's insistence that Clara rest, she immediately took charge of the household, directing her brothers in cleaning tasks she couldn't yet perform herself. Thomas, at 12, proved eager to learn about ranch work. Samuel, 10, had a way with animals that impressed even Hank. And little James, though only 6, was determined to help wherever he could. Clara herself was a revelation. Once her feet began to heal, she transformed the chaotic kitchen into an organized domain, producing meals that made the previous fare seem like prison rations. She attacked the dust and neglect of the house with fierce determination, and by the end of her first week, the main rooms of the ranch house gleamed in a way they hadn't since Pierce's mother was alive. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Pierce asked one evening as they finished a meal of perfectly seasoned venison stew. Clara smiled, the expression transforming her face. "My mother taught me. She was in service to a fine family back east before she married my father. She always said proper cooking was an art form." "She taught you well," Pierce said, savoring the last bite. As the days passed, Pierce found himself increasingly drawn to Clara's quiet strength. She never complained, despite the magnitude of the task she'd undertaken. The woman had walked 30 miles with 3 children in her care, her feet bleeding, yet she spoke of it as if it had been merely an inconvenience. Clara, for her part, watched Pierce with growing interest. He was unlike any man she'd known, strong but gentle, commanding but fair. She observed how he took time to teach Thomas about horses, how he listened patiently to Samuel's endless questions about cattle, how he always had a kind word or small treat for James. One evening, as Clara sat on the porch mending one of Pierce's shirts, he joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Your brothers are settling in well," he commented, taking a seat beside her. Clara nodded. "They needed this. Stability, space to run, good food. Thomas has already grown an inch, I swear. And you?" Pierce asked. "Are you settling in?" Clara's hands stilled on her mending. "I am." "More than I expected to," she hesitated. "Mr. Blackwood, Pierce," he corrected gently. "We're hardly formal around here." "Pierce," she amended with a small smile. "I wanted to thank you properly, what you did for us. Taking in not just me but my brothers, not many would have done that." Pierce sipped his coffee. "I know what it's like to be responsible for others when you're hardly more than a child yourself. My father died when I was 28, left me this place and all the debts that came with it. Some days I feel like I'm drowning." It was the most he'd revealed of himself since they'd met, and Clara recognized the gift of his confidence. "You're not drowning," she said softly. "You're swimming against the current, but you're strong enough to make it." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of mutual respect and perhaps something more. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of hooves. Pierce was on his feet instantly, hand going to the revolver he wore even at home. "Get inside," he told Clara. "Wake Hank and keep the boys quiet." Clara gathered her mending and hurried inside without question. Pierce moved to the edge of the porch, watching as 5 riders approached the ranch. He recognized the leader, Hollister's debt collector, from before, but now with reinforcements. "Evening, gentlemen," Pierce called when they were within earshot. "You're a ways from town." The leader spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Told you I'd be back, Blackwood. Mr. Hollister wants his money." "And I told you I paid what I owed," Pierce replied evenly, though his heart hammered in his chest. 5 against 1 were poor odds, even with Hank inside. "Interest, Blackwood, it accumulates." The man grinned nastily. "But maybe we can work something out." "Heard you got yourself a pretty little maid. Maybe she could entertain us for the evening, settle your debts." White-hot rage surged through Pierce. "Get off my land," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. now. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the sound of a rifle being cocked. Clara stood in the doorway, Pierce's Winchester in her hands, aimed steady. "My brothers and I have excellent aim," she called clearly. "Our father made sure of that. And there's another rifle trained on you from the upper window." Pierce didn't dare look to see if this was true, but the debt collector and his men exchanged uneasy glances. "This ain't over, Blackwood," the leader snarled, but he wheeled his horse around. The group retreated, dust rising in their wake. When they were gone, Pierce turned to Clara, who was lowering the rifle with trembling hands. "Where did you learn to handle a gun like that?" he asked, taking the Winchester from her. "I wasn't lying about my father teaching us," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "He believed everyone should know how to protect themselves." She glanced up at the second floor, though I was bluffing about the other rifle. "It's just Thomas up there with a broom handle pointed out the window." Despite the tension of the moment, Pierce laughed. "Remind me never to play poker with you, Clara Wilson." Later that night, after the boys were asleep and Hank had retired to his quarters above the stable, Pierce found Clara in the kitchen, scrubbing pots with unnecessary vigor. "You should rest," he said. Clara shook her head. "I keep thinking about those men. Will they come back?" Pierce leaned against the doorframe. "Eventually. Hollister's a problem I haven't figured out how to solve yet. He owns half the businesses in Silver Creek and has most folks too scared to stand against him." "Is it true? Do you owe him money?" "No," Pierce said firmly. "Not anymore. I borrowed to get through last winter after we lost so many cattle in the drought. Paid it back with interest when we sold the spring calves. But Hollister's not the type to let a good source of income go. He's been trying to run me off this land for years." Clara set down her scrub brush. "Why?" "Water rights. Blackwood Ranch controls the best access to the river for 20 miles. My father secured the rights legally, but Hollister's never accepted that." Clara dried her hands on her apron. "Then we'll have to stand firm." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "My brothers and I aren't going anywhere," she said with quiet determination. Unless you want us to." Pierce crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I don't want you to go anywhere, Clara, having you and the boys here. It's brought life back to this place." Clara looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I've never felt as safe anywhere as I do here, even with men threatening us with guns." She gave a small laugh. "That probably sounds mad." "Not mad at all," Pierce murmured. His hand rose to touch her cheek, a feather-light caress. "I'd like to court you properly, Clara Wilson, if you'd allow it." Clara's breath caught. "I'd like that very much." The summer days stretched long and golden as July turned to August. The ranch flourished under the combined efforts of its expanded household. Pierce hired 2 new hands to help with the cattle, men from town who had no love for Hollister and weren't afraid to say so. Clara's position evolved from maid to something more akin to mistress of the house. The brothers thrived in the open spaces of the ranch, each finding their own interests and responsibilities. Thomas showed a natural affinity for horsemanship, while Samuel became Hank's shadow, learning the secrets of the land. Little James discovered a talent for whittling, creating small wooden animals that delighted everyone. Pierce courted Clara with old-fashioned care, bringing wildflowers from the high meadows, reading to her in the evenings, teaching her to ride the gentlest mare in the stable. Their moments alone were precious and increasingly charged with unspoken desire, but Pierce was determined to do things properly. One evening in late August, they rode to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, the river a silver ribbon in the distance. "My father brought my mother here when he first showed her the land," Pierce said. "She told me it was the moment she fell in love not just with him, but with the promise of what they could build together." Clara dismounted, standing close to Pierce as they gazed over the property. "They built something beautiful." "It almost slipped away," Pierce admitted. "After the drought, after father died, I nearly lost hope. And now," Clara asked softly. Pierce turned to her, taking her hands in his. Now I see a future again. Because of you, Clara. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged as the sun dipped below the horizon. When they returned to the ranch, Clara's brothers pretended not to notice their clasped hands and flushed cheeks, though Thomas gave Pierce a serious nod that made the rancher smile. The threat from Hollister hadn't disappeared. Twice more his men came to the ranch, but each time they found not one man but a united household prepared to defend their home. Word spread through the territory of the Blackwood Ranch's resistance, and others who had suffered under Hollister's tactics began to take notice. By September, Pierce knew he couldn't wait any longer. He rode into Silver Creek, this time to visit the small church and speak with the minister. 3 days later, with a simple gold ring in his pocket, he took Clara for a walk along the creek that gave the ranch its water. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after my parents died," Clara said as they walked. "All I could think about was keeping my brothers safe, giving them a chance at a decent life." "And now," Pierce echoed her question from weeks before. Clara smiled. "Now I dream of more. A future that includes love, not just survival." Pierce stopped, taking both her hands in his. "I want to give you that future, Clara, you and your brothers." He dropped to one knee. "I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you on that trail, barefoot but unbowed." "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Clara's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." They were married in October 1878, when the aspen leaves had turned to gold and the first hint of winter touched the mountain air. The ceremony at the Silver Creek Church was attended by the ranch hands, a few townspeople brave enough to defy Hollister's influence, and most importantly, Clara's brothers and old Hank, who wept unashamedly as they exchanged vows. Clara wore a dress of pale blue, ordered from Denver as Pierce's wedding gift. Her feet, now fully healed, were clad in soft leather boots. The scars she carried were invisible but honored reminders of the strength that had brought her 30 miles to find her future. The winter that followed was harsh but beautiful. The Blackwood ranch house, once empty and neglected, now overflowed with warmth and life. Clara and Pierce shared the master bedroom, transformed by Clara's touch into a haven of comfort. The brothers settled more deeply into ranch life, each finding their place in the daily rhythms of the land. Hollister's threats continued, but they found less purchase against the united front of the Blackwood household. When spring arrived, bringing new calves and fresh hope, other ranchers in the territory began to align themselves with Pierce's stand against the businessman's tactics. By summer, Hollister's influence had begun to wane. His attempts at intimidation met with growing resistance throughout the region. One warm evening in June 1879, nearly a year after Clara had first arrived at the ranch, Pierce found her in the garden she'd established behind the house. Her hands were dirty from planting, her face flushed with exertion and something more. "I have news," she said, smiling up at him from where she knelt among the vegetables. Pierce helped her to her feet. "What kind of news?" Clara took his hand and placed it on her abdomen. "By winter there will be another Blackwood at the ranch." Pierce's eyes widened. "A baby, our baby." Clara nodded, laughing as he lifted her in a careful embrace, spinning her around before setting her gently back on her feet. "Are you happy?" she asked, though his joy was unmistakable. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Pierce answered, kissing her deeply. That night, they shared the news with the boys, who received it with excitement. Thomas, now 13 and increasingly mature, shook Pierce's hand solemnly. "Father would be proud to know his grandchild will be born a Blackwood," he said. By Christmas 1879, the Blackwood Ranch had transformed completely from the struggling enterprise Pierce had nearly lost. The cattle herd had doubled, the house shone with care and purpose, and most importantly, the sound of a newborn's cry echoed through the halls. Pierce William Blackwood, Jr. was born on a snowy December morning, with his mother's honey-colored eyes and his father's strong features. His uncles took turns holding him carefully, making solemn promises to teach him everything from writing to whittling to the names of all the stars. As the new year of 1880 approached, Pierce and Clara sat before the fire in their bedroom, their son sleeping peacefully in the cradle Pierce had crafted himself. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. "That day on the trail when you found us." Pierce kissed her temple. "I knew I wanted to help you. I didn't know you'd end up saving me," Clara smiled. "We saved each other." Outside, snow fell softly on the Blackwood ranch, covering the land in pristine white. In the stable, the horses rested peacefully. In their rooms, the Wilson boys dreamed of tomorrow's adventures. And in the heart of the house, Pierce and Clara Blackwood held each other close, their love a shelter stronger than any walls, their future as bright as the stars above the Colorado mountains. 5 years later, the Blackwood Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the territory. Clara and Pierce had added a daughter, Catherine, to their family, and Clara's brothers had become fine young men. Thomas, at 17, managed much of the horse breeding program. Samuel had developed a talent for veterinary care, studying with a doctor in Denver during the winters. Even young James, now 11, had specific responsibilities, caring for the chickens and helping Clara with her expanded gardens. Hollister had finally been driven from the territory, his schemes exposed by a coalition of ranchers and businessmen led by Pierce. Silver Creek had grown into a proper town, with a schoolhouse where Catherine and young Pierce would soon begin their education. On warm summer evenings, Pierce and Clara still walked to their special hilltop to watch the sunset over the land they loved. Sometimes they brought their children, teaching them the names of wildflowers and telling stories of how a barefoot young woman and her brothers had walked 30 miles to find their destiny. "I would walk 1,000 miles more to end up here," Clara told Pierce one such evening as they watched their children chase fireflies in the twilight. Pierce drew her close. "No need for that," he said, kissing her softly. "You're already home."